Story 1. Benford's law describes how large datasets of numbers behave in very predictable ways. It is one of the easiest methods to detect whether a company is falsifying its financial records. Story 2. At one point, the human population numbered between 1,000 and 10,000. We came very close to extinction. Story 3. Elements heavier than lithium were formed in the cores of stars. Those heavier than iron were formed in supernovae. Story 4. A female turkey can lay an egg that does not need to be fertilized by a male, and the chick that hatches will always be male. Story 5. Grizzly bears in Yellowstone eat around 300,000 moths a month, which accounts for 1/3 of their calorie intake. Story 6. If you stand on any planet or moon in the solar system and look up, you will see essentially the same night sky as seen from Earth, with the same constellations, because the stars are unfathomably farther away than the planets. One exception is Pluto. From Pluto, Proxima Centauri appears slightly displaced compared with its position as seen from Earth. That demonstrates how far Pluto is from Earth. Story 7. You always have more knowledge than you can put into words. As Michael Polanyi said, you can never fully articulate, for example, all of the knowledge you rely on to ride a bicycle. There is always some knowledge left unspoken. Polanyi's book Personal Knowledge changed my thinking. The Tacit Dimension is a more compact book that covers some of the same ideas. Story 8. The use of fingerprinting can be traced back to China in the 700s for identification. It was not used for forensics until the 1800s. Story 9. Consider just how capable ancient humans were. At least 50,000 years ago, humans crossed about 60 miles of open ocean and colonized Australia. The timeline for colonizing America has steadily been pushed back. For tens of thousands of years, modern humans coexisted with other ancient hominids that were not quite the same as us but close enough to interbreed and produce viable, fertile offspring. I find it absolutely mind-blowing to think about. Story 10. Only 3% of the water on Earth is freshwater, and less than 1/3 of that is not frozen. Story 11. Cheetahs are not big cats. They are large members of the small cat family. Story 12. During the Cold War, the United States government established a front mining company in the Soviet Union to obtain a metal needed for the Blackbird reconnaissance aircraft, a resource available only there. The United States acquired Soviet metal, enabling unhindered surveillance of the Soviet Union. Story 13. San Juan, Puerto Rico should be named Puerto Rico, San Juan. It was mixed up by a map maker. Story 14. I am not sure if this is a little-known fact, but it blew my mind that sharks have been on Earth longer than trees. Story 15. The University of Cambridge is about 200 years older than the Aztec Empire. Story 16. Babies can die from a lack of love, human touch, cuddling, hugging, and nuzzling. Story 17. Woolly mammoths still roamed the Earth when the pyramids were built. Story 18. There are more stars in the universe than grains of sand on Earth. The follow-up used to be that a single grain of sand contains more atoms than there are stars, but recent research shows you need a whole gram of sand to match that number. Story 19. The energy stored in all the oil and gas on Earth is equivalent to just 8.5 days' worth of sunlight hitting the planet's surface. Story 20. It took humans less than 66 years from the first powered flight in 1903 to landing a person on the moon in 1969. Story 21. All humans share 99.9% of the same deoxyribonucleic acid, and the remaining 0.1% is what makes us different. Story 22. The fax machine was invented at the same time that the Oregon Trail migration was occurring. Story 23. Through much trial and effort, the United States military has determined a minimum level of intelligence required to comprehend and perform the basic tasks taught in boot camp, such as folding your clothes neatly, paying attention to fold points and creases, storing them in your locker, lacing your shoes, and assembling a rifle. Fully 10% of the United States population fails to meet this minimum level. Story 24. Most people value short-term good feelings more than long-term stability. If you understand this, much about the world will be easier to understand. Story 25. Before decomposers evolved, dead trees piled up, did not decompose, and eventually became coal. Story 26. Dinosaurs evolved on the other side of the Milky Way. About 250 million years ago, when they originated, our solar system was on the opposite side of the galaxy from where it is now. Story 27. Over 99% of all species that have ever existed on Earth are extinct. Story 28. The difference between a million and a billion. A million seconds is about 11 days, and a billion seconds is about 31.5 years. Now think about the billionaires. Story 29. This is not widely known, but perhaps less considered or internalized. In the past, families had many children because infant and child mortality was tragically high. Nearly everyone had outlived one or more of their children. The most basic medical practices we teach our children have saved countless lives and families. Please wash your hands. Story 30. The pots of honey found by archaeologists in the Egyptian pyramids are still edible, even though they are more than 3,000 years old. Story 31. There are approximately 3 trillion trees on our planet Earth. Story 32. Between 14 and 140 million new stars ignite somewhere in our universe every minute. Story 33. Vacuum decay essentially means that, at any moment and without warning, the universe could cease to exist and never exist again. Story 34. There are more bacterial cells in your body than human cells. Story 35. The Apollo guidance computer on the Apollo 11 spacecraft, which landed humans on the moon, was a machine with 64 kilobytes of memory that operated at 0.043 megahertz. Story 36. Gravity causes an attraction between objects with mass and works across vast distances. People have mass, which means we are all slightly attracted to each other. When I wave my arm, I am moving the atoms in your body, wherever you happen to be. Story 37. Experiments suggest that subconscious parts of the brain start sending signals to perform actions well before the conscious part makes the decision to do them. Sometimes this happens a few microseconds earlier, sometimes minutes, depending on the action and the preparation required. The implication is that decisions are actually made at the subconscious level, and the conscious process of making a decision may be more like justifying a decision. Evidence from split brain experiments supports this. In these studies, people with epilepsy who had the two hemispheres surgically separated could not communicate between sides. Researchers would instruct one side to pick up a pencil and then ask the other side, which controls speech, why the action was taken. The speaking side quickly produced often implausible rationales. It appears the brain has mechanisms that construct post hoc explanations for actions. Story 38. Animal numbers in Africa are still recovering to their historic levels after rinderpest almost wiped out most ungulates, or animals with hooves, in the 1800s. The disease was introduced from Europe and killed so many animals that the environment changed. It contributed to the scramble for Africa by causing famines. Story 39. Hershey chocolate and Hershey ice cream are two separate, unrelated companies. Story 40. There is a theory that explains why humans are universally attracted to shiny things. It is because we are hardwired to seek out water, and sunlight reflecting on water is, of course, shiny. Story 41. Space starts at about 100 kilometers above the Earth's surface. If you could somehow drive straight upward at highway speeds, it would take you less than an hour to get there. Instead, we have to deal with gravity and air resistance, which is why rockets are so complicated and powerful. Story 42. Using garlic bread as buns for a meatball marinara sandwich is delicious. Story 43. More people live in slavery now than at any other time in human history. Story 44. Pablo Picasso died 5 years after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Story 45. Lions are not very good climbers, but they can leap forward 36 feet. Story 46. Operation Midnight Climax was established to study the effects of lysergic acid diethylamide on non-consenting individuals. Sex workers on the Central Intelligence Agency payroll were instructed to lure clients back to safe houses, where the clients were surreptitiously given a range of substances and observed behind one-way glass. The sex workers were trained to use postcoital questioning to determine whether victims could be persuaded to disclose secrets involuntarily. Victims were sometimes exposed to subliminal messages intended to induce involuntary acts, including criminal activities such as robbery, assault, and assassination. Many Central Intelligence Agency operatives involved in the experiments also used the drugs and sex workers for recreational purposes. Story 47. Cleopatra was born closer in time to the release of the iPhone than to the building of the Great Pyramid of Giza. The gap between Stegosaurus and Tyrannosaurus rex is larger than the gap between Tyrannosaurus rex and the present. 1,000,000 seconds is about 11.5 days. 1 billion seconds is about 31.7 years. If you assume that in every human generation at least one person lives to about 100 and that their life briefly overlapped with another person who also lived to about 100, the entire span of human civilization can be covered by the overlapping lives of about 50 people. Story 48. Plastic recycling was a lie created by the oil industry to ease the public's conscience about pollution and to sell more single-use plastics. The industry invented advertising campaigns and convinced city governments to place recycling bins, but it never implemented an actual recycling program for plastics. Much of the plastic is shipped to other countries or buried. Story 49. You are one post away from being featured in a BuzzFeed article. Story 50. Not sure if this counts as a little-known fact, but the day after September 11, 2001, when all flights were grounded, the Earth's temperature dropped 2 degrees. It blows my mind. Story 51. It's not climate change alone that's dangerous to humanity. The climate has changed multiple times in history, sometimes even more extremely than it is now. The problem is the pace at which it happens. If it occurs over a few hundred or a few thousand years, ecosystems can adapt. Right now, we are changing the climate at top speed, causing changes that would usually occur over millennia. Story 52. The Argonaut octopus detaches his penis and throws it at the female to mate. The penis then swims after her while the male slumps off to grow a new penis. Story 53. Whales evolved from land-dwelling mammals that later returned to the ocean and adapted to aquatic life. Story 54. There will never be a perfect chess computer. A conservative estimate is that there are 10 to the power of 120 different games of chess, though the exact number is unknown. By comparison, there are about 10 to the power of 80 atoms in the observable universe. Even if all the matter in the observable universe were used to build a chess computer, every atom would have to calculate 10 to the power of 40 games to cover every possible outcome. Story 55. Wombats poop in cube shapes and stack them to mark their territory. Story 56. Allegedly domesticated dogs are among the most deadly animals on Earth, killing 30,000 to 40,000 humans per year and making them the second most deadly mammal after humans. Story 57. Given the size and age of the universe, our lives on Earth are insignificant. By number and variety of cells, we are the smaller part of a symbiotic organism. The larger part is our gut biota, which we feed, water, and protect, and on whose leftovers we live. Since our gut is open at both ends, it is effectively outside, and we are a sack around it. Story 58. We have video interviews with people who entered adulthood in the Victorian era, that is, actual Victorians. Story 59. There is no way to prove that we all see the same colors. Story 60. Not everyone's mind's eye is in pictures. Some people visualize in words. Story 61. Many regional banks and credit unions are not required to report your credit to more than one credit bureau. If you have only one credit report and need a loan that requires reports from other bureaus, it does not matter how good your rating is. Your credit will look poor with the other bureaus. I worked at a dealership for many years, and once had to show a customer that his regional and popular credit union reported only to TransUnion. As a result, the banks charged him double-digit interest rates. Story 62. Once you know the difference between sympathy and empathy, you will notice that many people lack empathy. Let me illustrate with an example. If I told a group of people I was sad because my dog died, many would feel sorry for me. If I told that same group I was depressed because my goldfish died, fewer people would feel sorry for me. It is just a goldfish, so what? This is the fundamental difference between sympathy and empathy. If you feel sorry for me when my dog dies, but not when my goldfish dies, you are not being empathetic. You are only being sympathetic. It is likely you feel sorry for me because you imagine how you would feel if your dog died and project those feelings onto me. True empathy means acknowledging and valuing emotions, even when you do not understand them. People with empathy do not compare my emotions to how theirs would be in my situation. They can acknowledge my feelings without sharing them. Story 63. By most metrics, human life is better than ever. People live longer, fewer children die young, deaths from war and violence have declined, and overall we are richer, with fewer people living in extreme poverty or suffering famine than at any time before. Story 64. Neuroplasticity. For a long time, people believed the brain structure was relatively fixed after childhood. Research now shows the brain can create new neural pathways and alter existing ones in response to experiences, thoughts, feelings, and environmental changes, even in adulthood. These changes can be positive or negative. Story 65. Some people don't have an inner monologue. I recently learned this, and it really blew my mind. Story 66. Almost all fossil fuels on Earth formed during a window in evolutionary time, when plants had evolved, wood but fungi had not yet evolved the ability to decompose it. For millions of years, wood accumulated because no organisms could decompose it. Story 67. Is the universe mainly made of atoms? No. Most of the universe is made of dark energy, about 73%. We have learned this only in the last 10 years. Source: Michio Kaku, The Universe in a Nutshell, around minute 40. Note: I corrected dark matter to dark energy. For more information, see the National Aeronautics and Space Administration explanation of dark energy. Story 68. Evangelical preachers and theologians in the United States were originally fairly comfortable with Darwinian evolution. It was not until the 1910s and 1920s that the culture war against evolution began. Notably, Benjamin Breckinridge Warfield was a theologian famous for his work on the evangelical doctrine of biblical inerrancy, the belief that the Bible, when properly understood, contains no errors, and he was surprisingly comfortable with human evolution. Story 69. BuzzFeed uses several Reddit accounts to ask Reddit users questions, and then turns the responses into a listicle. Story 70. There are no violet or indigo colors in a rainbow. There is only one purple color. Story 71. Colors are subjective and cultural. There is a tribe in Polynesia that uses a single term for blue and green. Let's call it grue. They perceive the difference as shades of the same color, for example, sea grue and tree grue. In Danish, there is no distinct word for pink or orange. They may describe them as light violet or reddish brown. Story 72. Humans have built wonders only the ancients could have dreamed of. We built airplanes, studied the deep cosmos, discovered the world of atoms, and mastered our planet. But humanity's most impressive and beautifully poetic achievement is putting cheese in pizza crust. Story 73. The moon appears upside down from the southern hemisphere. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.